Marcus stood in the toy store aisle, his wallet open, staring at the gap between the price tag and the $17 he held. The Lego set his son had circled in the catalog sat on the shelf, $42.99, just beyond reach. He closed his eyes and slid the wallet back into his pocket. His boy would be 7 tomorrow, and Marcus would show up empty-handed again. He turned and walked out, the automatic doors hissing behind him like a sigh of pity. The apartment was silent when he came home. Emma, his ex-wife, had dropped off Lucas 2 days early to accommodate a work trip, and the boy was asleep on the futon in what used to be Marcus's office, but now served as his bedroom. The kitchen held a note on the counter, Emma's handwriting precise and matter-of-fact. He ate at 6. Bedtime routine at 8. Don't let him stay up late. Marcus had stopped noticing how clinical her instructions had become. Maybe he'd gotten used to it. The rent was 3 weeks late. The warehouse job had cut his hours, and the overtime he'd picked up at the diner 3 nights a week barely covered groceries. There was no room in the math for a birthday present. He sat at the kitchen table in the dark, phone glowing with the bank app, confirming what he already knew. $243 to his name until Thursday. The thought of Lucas's face when he realized there was nothing to unwrap, not even a cheap action figure or a board game from a thrift store, settled in Marcus's chest like a stone. The boy had already experienced enough disappointment. 2 years ago, when the divorce papers came through, Lucas had asked if it was something he did. Marcus had held him for 20 minutes without answering, because no answer existed that would make it better. The next morning, Marcus awoke to his phone buzzing. 6:45 a.m. An email from the diner manager. A co-worker had called in sick. Could he cover the breakfast shift? He could. He texted back yes, before his mind caught up to his thumb. Lucas would still be asleep. Marcus showered in the dark and left a note taped to the bathroom mirror. Dad went to work. Mrs. Shun next door is here if you need anything. Love you. He'd arranged with his neighbor 2 weeks ago, before the shift cuts, before he'd known he'd be desperate. She'd agreed without hesitation, though Marcus suspected Emma had talked to her. Everyone knew. At the diner, Marcus moved on. Autopilot, coffee, eggs, pancakes, toast, more coffee. His hands were efficient. His mind was elsewhere, calculating whether he could pick up more shifts next week, whether the food bank would have anything beyond canned vegetables, whether Lucas would remember this birthday as the one where his dad had nothing. Around 11, during the lunch rush, a woman came in alone. She was maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back and a leather jacket worn soft at the seams. She ordered eggs and sat at the counter, and when Marcus brought her plate, she was looking at her phone, scrolling through photos. She caught him noticing. "My grandson's birthday's today too," she said. The accent was Eastern European, or something close. 7 years old, like your son. Marcus hadn't told her about Lucas. He stopped moving, coffee pot still in hand. "Mrs. Chun," she continued, "your neighbor. She mentioned it. I was there dropping something off for her." The woman smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. Not unkind, but tired. "I remembered that age, when everything matters too much." She ate slowly, methodically, the way someone does when they're not in a hurry. She paid in cash, leaving $40 for a $19 meal. When Marcus thanked her, she was already putting on her jacket. "Tell him the present is outside your building. Don't be upset." Then she was gone. The shift ended at 3. Marcus picked up Lucas from Mrs. Chun, who pretended not to know anything when he asked if a woman had visited. The boy bounced against the car seat the entire drive home, already 5 going innate in his excitement about turning 7, somehow unbothered by the fact that his dad had been gone since dawn. At the apartment building, Marcus made Lucas wait while he checked the stairwell. There, on the concrete landing outside his door, sat a cardboard box, large, sealed with brown tape. No label. Inside was a bicycle. An old one but solid blue frame, chrome handlebars reflecting the dim hallway light, training wheels still attached. The wheels turned smooth and certain when Marcus spun them. There was no note, no explanation. Just this object, improbable and concrete, worth more than the thoughts Marcus had been holding all day. He carried it into the apartment, and Lucas emerged from the bedroom, sleepy and confused, then transfixed. Did you get me a bike? The voice was small, almost disbelieving. Marcus couldn't answer. He set it down on the linoleum and stood there, this man with nothing in his bank account, looking at his son, looking at a stranger's generosity. His throat was moving wrong. His eyes were doing something he hadn't permitted them to do in 2 years, the way they were burning now, hot and full, because someone had seen him failing and had chosen to quietly undo it, had trusted him enough to leave this mercy on his doorstep without asking for anything but the chance for his son to have one. Mourning-worthy math worked out differently. Lucas learned to ride in the parking lot behind the apartment building within 2 days. By that Saturday, 3 weeks after the birthday, the training wheels were off. Marcus held the seat, running alongside him. Letting go for stretches, he thought his son wasn't noticing, and Lucas was noticing everything. Legs pumping, the concentration fierce and total on his small face. When he finally coasted alone for a full 20 meters before the front wheel wobbled and he jumped off, he didn't fall. He turned to Marcus with a grin that erased the past 2 years in a single motion. That night, after Emma picked him up for her custody weekend, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and made a decision he'd been avoiding. He couldn't let this debt hang. Not because he owed payment, he understood the gift hadn't come with that expectation, but because he needed to know why. Mrs. Chun had deflected every question with the same gentle firmness, and Marcus's pride, which had been flattened by financial necessity, was rising again, demanding an answer. Not gratitude, clarity. He went downstairs Monday morning before work and knocked on Mrs. Chan's door. She answered in her robe, coffee in hand, unsurprised to see him. She knew why he was there. "Her name is Katya," Mrs. Chun said, letting him into her apartment. It smelled like jasmine and old cooking oil. "She comes to the church sometimes. She teaches in the community center, Russian language classes. Very quiet. But she watches people." "Why would she do that? Why the bike?" "Because she saw you," Mrs. Chan said simply. "She told me she saw you in the grocery store one evening, with your son, looking at the price of milk. Not deciding whether to buy it, looking at the price. She said she recognized that look. She said it meant you were calculating whether you could afford to feed him the way he needed." Mrs. Chun set down her cup. "Katya doesn't forget that look." Marcus left her apartment with an address, the community center where Katya taught evening classes, and a word of caution. "She's not gentle, Marcus, but she's good. Don't mistake the two." The center was housed in a converted church basement, fluorescent lights humming in the hallway. Through a small window in a classroom door, Marcus could see Katya sitting at a desk, going over papers. She was smaller than he remembered, and older too, the way people are when you see them without the momentum of a first meeting. She looked up and something in her face tightened. She wasn't expecting him, but she wasn't entirely surprised either. "The bike was too much," Marcus said, not bothering with hello. "I need to know why." Katya set down her pen and gestured to the chair across from her desk. He didn't sit. "My son was 7 when we left Kuyu," she said, speaking to the papers in front of her. 1992. My husband wanted to stay. He was certain it would pass, whatever was coming. But I knew better. You develop an instinct when things begin to break. She finally looked at Marcus. We had nothing when we arrived here. My English was worse. My credentials didn't matter. But we had him. I remember his birthday that year, 3 months after we came. I was working in a laundry. We had money for food, but not for anything else. I made him a cake from scratch, from a recipe my mother gave me. It had oil instead of butter, and no eggs because we couldn't afford them. It was terrible. She opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out a worn photograph in a plastic sleeve. The image was faded, colors bleeding into each other, but Marcus could see a boy, maybe 7, holding a plate with a dark, dense cake. He was smiling anyway. My husband went out that night, Katja continued, and came back with a toy, a small wooden truck. He'd found it at a garage sale. Spent money we didn't have. I was angry with him. We argued. I told him it was foolish, that we needed to save, that a toy wouldn't matter. She tapped the photograph. He mattered. The toy mattered. Not because of what it was, but because my husband decided his son's 7th birthday was worth the risk of having less tomorrow. What happened to your son? Marcus asked, though something in her tone already told him. He's 42 now. He lives in Toronto. He has his own family. He doesn't remember the cake or the truck. He remembers that his parents chose him. Katja slid the photograph back into the drawer. But I remember the man my husband was in that moment. I remember being angry at someone who was loving our child with everything he had. And I remember that anger being the wrong response. When he died, 7 years ago, heart attack, very sudden, I realized I'd spent decades regretting that I hadn't told him I understood, that his foolishness had been exactly right. Marcus sat down then. The chair was small, institutional, the kind that belongs in a classroom. Your wife is gone, yes? Katja asked. Ex-wife. And yes, I'm alone with him. Then you know that everything you do means more than it should, because you're doing it by yourself. And sometimes you fail because the math doesn't allow for anything else. She stood, moving to a cabinet where she pulled out a small journal, leather-bound and worn. She handed it to him. This is my husband's diary. He wrote in it every day for 30 years. I want you to read the entries from that year 1992, the ones about my son. I want you to see what was in his head when he bought that truck. Marcus took the journal carefully, as though it might break. Why are you giving me this? Because you're going to need it when you're tired, when you think you're not enough. Katja moved back to her desk. Your son doesn't remember who gave him the bicycle. He only knows he has it, and that his father lets him ride it, and that feels like love. That's all that matters. But you'll struggle with the debt of it, the charity of it, the shame of not being able to provide. Greed about my husband. See how he held both things at once, the necessity of admitting he didn't have enough, and the refusal to let that stop him from trying. Marcus left the community center with the journal pressed against his chest. He didn't open it until Thursday night, after Emma dropped off Lucas, after the boy was asleep. He read by the kitchen light, careful handwriting, in a language he couldn't understand. But the dates were clear, and the photographs interspersed between the pages told a story his eyes could follow. A man and a woman and a boy, moving through time, sometimes smiling, sometimes worn, but always together. In one photograph, dated June 1993, the boy was riding a bicycle, not the same one. This one was red, slightly too large, training wheels attached. Behind him, pushing the seat, was a man with Katja's eyes. The entry beside it was dated 1 week later. Marcus couldn't read the words, but the pen strokes were heavier, more emphatic. A man recording something that mattered. He closed the journal and held it against his ribs, understanding now what Katja had wanted him to see, that shame and love could occupy the same moment without cancelling each other out, that accepting help wasn't weakness, it was the price of staying whole enough to give your child what he needed. Marcus read Katja's husband's journal in fragments, the way a man with no time reads on his lunch break at the diner, in the car before picking up Lucas, in the darkness before sleep. He didn't understand all the words. The Ukrainian alphabet defeated him, but the dates and photographs created a narrative his instinct could follow. A man documenting ordinary days, the small victories, the small failures, all held together by the fact that he kept showing up. 2 weeks into reading, Marcus found an entry from June 23, 1993, the bicycle photograph. Beside it, Katja had written a translation in careful English, dated years later. He wrote, "I bought the bicycle today. Oksana was angry with me for the money, but I saw him riding the neighbor's bike, and I saw his face when he had to give it back. His face broke. I spent the money. I will eat less this week." This is the correct mathematics. Marcus sat in his car in the diner parking lot and cried in a way he hadn't allowed himself to since the divorce. Not for his own suffering, but for recognizing himself in a man he'd never met, in the calculus of necessity, in the refusal to let scarcity define what you gave your child. He wiped his face with his palm and went back inside to finish his shift. That Saturday, instead of the usual silence of his apartment, Marcus called Emma and asked if they could talk, not over text, not through their son. She agreed reluctantly, and they met at a coffee shop near the park where Lucas was with his new boyfriend. Marcus had learned not to ask questions about this. Emma sat across from him with her arms crossed, the familiar posture of someone braced for disappointment. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said, "about the bicycle. Lucas's birthday present. Someone gave it to us. A woman, I don't know. And I've been ashamed of it. I've been ashamed that I couldn't provide that a stranger had to." Emma's face shifted, confusion flickering across it. "Marcus, I know. Mrs. Chun told me what happened. Did you? Do you know who she is?" "Yes, Katja. She teaches at the community center. She's been a regular at my office building. She teaches ESL to some of the administrative staff." Emma uncrossed her arms slightly. "She told me about it after it happened. She said she hoped it wouldn't damage your pride." The word hung between them. Pride. Not the good kind. The kind that let you fail silently while your child watched. "I'm telling you because I want to apologize," Marcus continued, "for a lot of things. But specifically, I want you to know that I'm not going to let this happen again. Not the way I have been. I'm applying for the warehouse manager position. It's full-time, benefits, better pay. I'm also going to night school. I want to finish my degree. I know it affects the schedule, but I think—" "Marcus, stop." Emma held up her hand. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" He didn't have a simple answer. He opened his wallet and showed her the photograph from Katja's husband's diary. The boy on the bicycle, the man pushing the seat. This is someone else's story. Someone else's failure and someone else's choice to do better anyway. And I realized I've been waiting for permission to do the same. I've been waiting for you to say it was okay, or for someone to fix it, or for the situation to somehow become easier. It's not going to become easier, so I'm going to become better." Emma looked at the photograph for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, less defensive. "The job interview is next week. You're going to get it. I know you will. And I'll help with the schedule. Lucas will understand more than you think he does." 2 weeks later, Marcus had the job. The pay was better, not by much, but enough that the math began to shift. Enough that he wasn't calculating survival week to week. He celebrated quietly, took Lucas to get ice cream, let him choose 2 scoops instead of 1. The boy asked if something was different about his dad. "Just happy," Marcus said. But the test came on a Tuesday in October, in the form of a call from the school. Lucas had gotten into an argument with another kid, and though he hadn't started it, he'd pushed back hard, and there was talk of a 3-day suspension. Marcus's stomach dropped. This was the kind of problem that pulled you backward, that made you choose between work and damage control. He left the warehouse early, picked up Lucas from the principal's office, and waited until they were in the car to speak. "Tell me what happened." Lucas, sullen and defensive, he said, "My family was broken." He said, "That's my mum doesn't want to live with us." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He wanted to correct the boy, wanted to explain custody and divorce, and the fact that Emma loved Lucas desperately, despite not loving Marcus. He wanted to fix it with words. Instead, he drove to the community center, parked outside, told Lucas to wait, and went in alone. Katya was in her office, grading papers. Again, it seemed to be all she did in the late afternoons. She looked up without surprise, as though she'd been expecting this visit for weeks. "My son got suspended," Marcus said. He pushed another kid. The other kid said his family was broken. Katya set down her pen. "Is his family broken?" "No, it's different." "But not broken." "Then this is what you tell him. Not to make him feel better, but to prepare him." Katya stood and went to the same cabinet where she'd kept her husband's diary. She pulled out a new photograph, this one in color, more recent. It showed the boy from the black and white photos, now a man, with a woman and 2 children. "My son grew up in instability, in a country on the edge of war, in poverty, in a family that was not what his grandparents had been. But he learned something from watching my husband refuse to let that define what he could give. He learned that broken things can be rebuilt, and that sometimes the rebuilding is the strongest part. How do I tell him that? You don't tell him. You show him." Katya handed him the color photograph. "You let him see you taking the suspension seriously. You go to the school and ask what needs to happen next. You don't fix it with anger or shame. You fix it with the same mathematics my husband used. You figure out what the moment requires, and you provide it, even if you have to eat less to do it." Marcus drove Lucas to the park afterward. They sat on a bench, and Marcus told him about Katya's family. Not in detail, but enough. He told him that families change shapes sometimes, and that didn't make them less real. He told him that when someone said something cruel, the correct response wasn't to make them regret it. It was to refuse to believe them. "So, I shouldn't have pushed him?" Lucas asked. "You should have told a teacher. But I understand why you didn't." Marcus put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Next time, tell me. Tell a teacher. Tell someone who can actually help. That's not weakness. That's intelligence." Lucas leaned against him, small and solid, still young enough to fit under his arm without awkwardness. They sat that way until the sun started to set, and Marcus felt something in his chest settle, not fix exactly, but find its proper weight. The shame wasn't gone, but it was no longer the heaviest thing he carried. 14 months later, Marcus stood in the hallway of the community center with Katya's husband's diary in his hands, finally ready to return it. The leather was warmer now, worn smooth by his repeated opening and closing. The photograph of the boy on the red bicycle had come loose from its page, and he'd taped it back in, carefully, with the kind of attention that said the object had become precious. The year had moved forward in increments that didn't announce themselves as progress. The warehouse manager position had turned into a promotion assistant operations director, which meant a salary that covered rent comfortably, that allowed for groceries without calculation. That meant Lucas could eat lunch at school without Marcus having to pack him something. The night classes were harder, the exhaustion real, but there was a rhythm now. Emma had remarried quietly, and her boyfriend came to Lucas's school recitals without tension. Marcus had learned how to sit in the same room as his ex-wife and her new partner, without the old shame rising. They were building something that wasn't love, but wasn't bitterness either. It was enough. Lucas was 8 now, and had outgrown the training wheels months ago. He rode the bicycle everywhere, and it had become an extension of him, the way childhood bikes do. Marcus had repainted it that summer, deep blue with silver trim, and the boy had helped, painting the handlebars while Marcus did the frame. It was the kind of ordinary Saturday that previous Marcus couldn't have imagined, not because it was special, but because it required enough stability to have space for Saturday projects. Katja looked surprised to see him, but not in a way that suggested she didn't understand why he was there. She was older than he'd remembered, or maybe he was just noticing it now. Her hands shook slightly as she took the diary from him. "I wanted to return it," Marcus said. "I've read it multiple times, and I think you need it more than I do." "It's your husband's words." Katja opened the journal and let it fall to a random page, not reading, just holding it. "You read it to understand something about yourself. That was the point. Now you return it. This means you understand." She closed it again and held it out to him. "No, you keep it. I have something else now." From a drawer, she pulled out a new journal, leather-bound, the pages still blank. "My son in Toronto, he called me last month. He told me something. He said his daughter, 7 years old, wanted a bicycle. He couldn't afford a good one, not right then, so he went to a used shop. He found one, fixed it, painted it. He said that when he was giving it to her, he remembered his grandfather, though he barely knew his grandfather. He said he remembered the idea of it, that sometimes love is measured in the things you do when you don't have enough." Marcus understood what she was showing him. "Your son," Katja continued, "he will carry this too. Not the shame of it, he'll be smarter than you and I both, but the knowledge that his father learned how to accept that he couldn't do everything alone. That's what gets passed on, not the struggle. The refusal to let the struggle make him small." She pressed the blank journal into his hands. "Write in this, for your son, the way my husband did. Not advice. Just the ordinary days, just witness. Let him know that you were here, that you tried, that when you failed, you found another way." Marcus held the blank pages like they were something fragile. He could see it clearly now. The choice to write wasn't about leaving a record. It was about marking the moment, about saying, "This mattered, and I was awake for it." That evening, after Emma dropped off Lucas, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with the new journal and began to write. He didn't write about the bicycle or the gift or Katja. He wrote about the ordinary Tuesday when Lucas had asked him why some kids had more toys than other kids. He wrote about the way his son had accepted the answer without bitterness, just the world as it was. He wrote about waking up that morning and realizing he had enough in his account to cover the field trip fee without choosing between electricity and food. He wrote about how Lucas's laugh sounded drawing when he wasn't calculating whether joy was affordable. 3 weeks later, Marcus was at the grocery store. The familiar one where Katja had seen him 2 years ago, pricing milk. He was buying things now, without that particular calculation. In the produce section, he noticed a man with a boy maybe 6, looking at the price of strawberries. The boy wanted them. The man was doing the math in his head. Marcus could see it plainly on his face, the same equation Marcus had learned. He didn't approach them. He didn't explain. He simply reached for the strawberries, a full pint, and when the man was distracted, Marcus set them in the boy's cart, then moved to another aisle. He didn't look back. He didn't wait for gratitude. He just left the mercy quietly, where it could be found, the way someone had done for him. That night, he wrote about it in the journal, about how it felt to be on the other side of that equation now, about how the man's face had looked exactly like his own face had looked, the particular exhaustion of someone doing the math and coming up short. He wrote it for Lucas, for his future reading, for the day when his son would be old enough to understand that his father had learnt something that couldn't be taught, only lived forward. A month later, Marcus ran into Katia at a grocery store. Not the same one, a different neighborhood. She was buying coffee, moving slowly, and when she saw Marcus with Lucas, she smiled in the way people do when they recognize that something they planted has grown. "Show her the bicycle," Lucas said, unprompted. He'd been riding it outside, and it was visible through the front windows, leaning against the cart rack. "It's a fine bicycle," Katia said, looking at Marcus and not the bike. "It is," Marcus agreed. They spoke for only a few minutes, the kind of brief conversation that acknowledges what already exists between people without needing to elaborate it. When they said goodbye, Katia touched Marcus's shoulder, the same gesture he'd learned to use with his son, a transmission. Walking home, Marcus held Lucas's hand, and his son held the bicycle with his other hand, walking it beside him on the sidewalk the way children do, when they're too excited to ride it, when just having it near is enough. The bicycle rolled forward, steady and certain, carrying everything it had been and becoming. With each rotation of its wheels, something new,